The dolls watch in the dark. The November wind howled through the barren trees of Millfield, Ohio, as Hailey Bennett's sedan rolled to a stop outside the old Victorian house on Sycamore Lane. It was November 3rd, 2025, and the sky was a slate of gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Hailey, 27, with pale skin and dark circles under her hazel eyes, stepped out, her breath fogging in the chill. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, strands whipping across her face as she stared at the house, a three-story relic of faded grandeur, its gabled roof sagging, its once vibrant blue paint peeling in long, curling strips. The windows were cloudy, some cracked, and the wraparound porch creaked under the weight of years, its railings splintered and draped with cobwebs. This was her inheritance, left by her Aunt Marjorie, who'd died 6 months ago. Hailey hadn't wanted to come, but after losing her twin sister Emily in a car accident 3 months prior, she needed to change, something to pull her out of the suffocating grief that clung to her like a second skin. Hailey and Emily had been inseparable, two halves of a whole, their laughter echoing through childhood memories. Emily's death had shattered Hailey, leaving her hollow, her days a blur of sleepless nights and half-hearted therapy sessions. The house was a chance to start over, or so she told herself. She'd never been close to Aunt Marjorie, a reclusive woman the town called the Doll Witch for her obsession with collecting antique dolls. Hailey remembered visiting once as a child, the house filled with glassy-eyed figures on every shelf, their porcelain faces unnervingly lifelike. She'd hated them then, and as she pushed open the rusted gate, the memory sent a shiver down her spine. The front door groaned as she turned the key, the air inside stale and heavy with the scent of dust and lavender. The foyer was dim, lit only by the weak light filtering through the grimy windows. A grand staircase swept upward, its carpet threadbare, and the walls were lined with shelves, hundreds of dolls, their painted faces staring down at her. Some were small, no bigger than her hand, dressed in faded lace. Others were life-sized, their silk dresses yellowed with age, their glass eyes glinting in the gloom. Hailey's stomach twisted. "Great," she muttered, setting her suitcase down. A house full of creepy dolls. Just what I needed. She spent the first day unpacking, trying to ignore the dolls' unblinking stares. The living room was a mausoleum of Victorian furniture, velvet chairs with claw feet, a cracked mirror above the fireplace, a gramophone in the corner. The kitchen was small, the cabinets stocked with canned goods long past their expiration dates, and the upstairs bedrooms were a maze of narrow halls and locked doors. Hailey chose the smallest room for herself, one with a single window and a bare mattress, the only space not overrun with dolls. She found a broom and started cleaning, the rhythmic motion, a distraction from the silence that pressed against her ears. But every so often, she'd glance over her shoulder, feeling the weight of those glass eyes, as if the dolls were watching her every move. That night, she cooked a simple meal, canned soup heated on the ancient stove, and sat at the dining table, a long mahogany slab surrounded by more dolls on high-backed chairs. Their shadows danced in the flicker of the single bulb overhead, and Hailey couldn't shake the feeling that they were shifting. She blinked, staring at a doll with blonde curls and a blue dress. Had its head been tilted that way before? She shook her head, chalking it up to exhaustion, and went to bed, the house creaking around her as the wind picked up outside. She woke at 3:14 a.m. to a sound, soft, rhythmic, like whispers weaving through the darkness. It wasn't the wind. She sat up, heart pounding, and listened. The sound was coming from downstairs, a faint murmur, like voices overlapping, too quiet to make out the words. She grabbed her phone, the flashlight app casting a stark white beam, and crept to the door, her bare feet cold against the hardwood. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows, the dolls on the shelves lining the walls, their eyes glinting like tiny mirrors. The whispers grew louder as she descended the stairs, her breath shallow, the air growing colder with each step. In the living room, the gramophone was spinning slowly, its needle scratching against a record she hadn't touched. The whispers were coming from it, a chorus of voices, high and childlike, chanting in a language she didn't recognize. Hailey's hand shook as she lifted the needle, the sound cutting off abruptly, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. She turned, her flashlight sweeping the room, and froze. A doll on the mantel, a small one with black hair and a red dress, had its head turned toward her. She was sure it had been facing the wall earlier. "This isn't funny," she whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out, hesitating, then turned the doll back to its original position. Its glass eyes seemed to follow her as she backed away. The next morning, Hailey called the only person she knew in Millfield, Mrs. Carter, an elderly neighbor who'd been friends with Aunt Marjorie. Mrs. Carter arrived an hour later, a stout woman with a pinched face and a scarf tied over her gray hair. She stood in the foyer, her eyes darting to the dolls, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You shouldn't have come here, girl," she said, her voice low. "This house ain't right." "Marjorie, she wasn't right." "What do you mean?" Hailey asked, crossing her arms to hide her unease. "She was just a collector, wasn't she?" Mrs. Carter shook her head, her gaze lingering on a doll with a cracked porcelain face. "She called them her children, said they were special vessels. She called them for souls. She'd go on about saving lost kids, keeping them safe in her dolls. Folks thought she was crazy, but after she died, well, some said they heard things, whispers. And those dolls, they don't stay where you put them." Hailey forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "That's just small-town gossip. They're just dolls." Mrs. Carter's eyes narrowed. "You hear anything at night, you leave. Don't look back." She left without another word, the door slamming behind her, the sound echoing through the house. Hailey tried to brush it off, but the day felt heavier after that. She decided to sort through Aunt Marjorie's things, hoping to find something to sell, anything to make the house feel less oppressive. In the attic, she found a trunk filled with old photographs, yellowed, letters, and a small metal box. Inside the box was a reel of 8mm film, labeled in Marjorie's spidery handwriting, "The Ritual 1987. Curiosity outweighing her unease, Hailey set up an old projector she'd found in the basement, threading the film with trembling hands. The footage was grainy, the colors washed out, but Marjorie's face was unmistakable younger, her hair still dark, her eyes wild with fervor. She sat in the living room, surrounded by dolls, a candle flickering on the table before her. "They're safe now," she said, her voice crackling through the projector speaker. "The children, their souls were lost, but I gave them a home. The ritual binds them to the dolls, keeps them here. They speak to me, tell me their stories, but they need more. They're hungry for company." She looked directly at the camera, her smile twisting into something feral. "One day, they'll have a new sister." Hailey stopped the film, her hands shaking. She felt sick, the air in the attic suddenly too thick to warm. She stumbled downstairs, the doll's eyes following her, their painted smiles seeming to widen. In the living room, she noticed something new, a doll on the sofa, one she hadn't seen before. It was larger than the others, its porcelain face eerily familiar, with auburn hair and hazel eyes. It looked like Emily. Hailey's breath caught, her knees buckling as she sank to the floor. "No," she whispered, reaching out, then pulling back. The doll's head tilted slowly, deliberately, its glass eyes locking onto hers. That night, the whispers returned, louder, more insistent. Hailey barricaded herself in her room, the door locked, a chair jammed under the handle. She clutched a kitchen knife, her phone on the bed beside her, but the signal was dead. The whispers grew into voices, childlike, pleading, then angry. "Join us," they chanted over and over, the words seeping through the walls. She heard footsteps, small, pattering, like children running outside her door. The doorknob rattled, the chair creaking as something pushed against it. Hailey stifled a sob, her grip tightening on the knife. At dawn, the sound stopped. Hailey emerged, her body aching, her mind frayed. The house was silent, but the dolls had moved. Dozens of them now lined the hallway, their heads turned toward her room, their glass eyes unblinking. The Emily doll sat at the end of the hall, its porcelain hand raised, as if beckoning. Hailey's scream caught in her throat. She ran to the living room, grabbing a box of matches from the mantel. "I'm done," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not my sister. You're not real." She doused the Emily doll with lighter fluid from the kitchen, struck a match, and dropped it. The doll ignited, flames licking up its silk dress, the porcelain blackening as it burned. But the fire didn't stop there. It spread unnaturally fast, climbing the walls, engulfing the shelves. The other dolls began to move, their heads turning, their tiny hands twitching, their glass eyes reflecting the flames. They opened their mouths, a chorus of screams erupting, high and piercing, the sound drilling into Hailey's skull. She ran for the door, but it wouldn't budge, the handle searing hot. The windows were sealed, the glass unyielding, and the flames grew closer, the heat blistering her skin. The dolls crawled toward her, their porcelain limbs cracking as they moved, their faces melting in the fire. But their eyes, those glass eyes, remained fixed on her. Hailey stumbled to the bathroom, the only room without dolls, and locked herself. Inside, she turned to the mirror above the sink, desperate for a glimpse of her own face, something to ground her. But her reflection was gone. The mirror showed only the room behind her, empty, the door ajar. She spun around. The door was still, locked. A whisper came from behind her, soft, familiar. "Now you're one of us." She turned back to the mirror, and there was the Emily doll standing where her reflection should have been, its burned face smiling, its glass eyes glowing with a sickly light. The door burst open, the dolls flooding in, their porcelain hands grabbing at her legs, her arms, their tiny fingers digging into her skin. Hailey screamed, swinging the knife, but it clattered to the floor as the dolls overwhelmed her, their weight dragging her down. Their mouths opened wider, revealing jagged, blackened teeth, and they bit small, sharp bites, drawing blood, their whispers turning to laughter. The Emily doll leaned close, its voice a perfect mimic of her sister's. "We're together again," it said, and Hailey's vision blurred, her body growing cold, her screams fading into silence. The fire died out as quickly as it had started, leaving the house untouched, the dolls pristine, their shelves orderly once more. Hailey was gone. In the living room, a new doll sat on the sofa, auburn hair, hazel eyes, a porcelain face frozen in a scream. The whispers returned that night, softer now, satisfied. Mrs. Carter drove by the next morning, slowing as she passed the house. She saw the new doll in the window, its head tilted toward the street, and crossed herself, speeding away. The house on Sycamore Lane stood quiet, waiting for its next visitor, the dolls watching in the dark,